All right, well, I want to welcome everyone to the Islamic Finance Symposium. Thank you, everyone, for coming out tonight. It's definitely a big event for both of our clubs. My name is Manav Khurana. I'm president of the Global Business Society, and I'm working alongside Hanifa, which is she's a member of the Muslim Student Association. We have a lot planned out for tonight, definitely an eventful evening. So let me introduce my partner right now, Hanifa. Again, she's from MSA, and she'll give you some more details about tonight.
Let me solve this. Assalamu alaikum and good evening. My name is Hanifa Dusty. I am a junior economics major at the University of Maryland. I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about the idea of this event and how I was inspired. I was inspired by my own curiosity about Islamic finance. I've been studying economics and financial concepts for about 3 years now, and I really don't know anything about the Islamic laws pertaining to financial decision making. So I just want to say that Islam is an all-encompassing religion, and there are many aspects to it. So I hope you all benefit from this presentation we have prepared. Jazakallah, and thank you.
Thanks, Hanifa, and thanks, Manav. All right, welcome everyone. Can you guys hear me okay in the back? All right, cool. Just to introduce myself, my name is Fahad Ismail. I am a second-year part-time MBA student here at the University of Maryland, and I'll be done hopefully this May. And just to tell you a little bit more about why am I here, this is really being run by Manav and Hanifa with the MSA at Maryland and with the Global Business Association at Smith. So I basically was very fortunate to go on a global business study trip with the MBA program. I'll speak to that a little bit more later. But basically, I'm just a member of the MSA. I saw Hanifa had posted this event, and I made a comment that I'd just come back from Malaysia to study Islamic finance. And she said, oh my God, we need you involved. So I said, fine, I'll come in and help with whatever facilitation I can. So I guess maybe to start off a bit, just to tell you my background, I'm doing a concentration in finance with my degree, and I've worked in commercial banking for 8 years at 4 different major North American banks, and currently I'm with the Bank of America as Vice President of Business Banking. And like you, like Hanifa, I was very curious about the substance and philosophy behind Islamic banking and finance, because it appeals to me both personally from my culture, I'm originally from Pakistan, and also from a professional standpoint because I chose finance as my profession and my study. So then I came across Dr. Hassan Ibrahim here at the Smith Business School, who was running one of these programs. If you want to stand up, Dr. Ibrahim. He's a distinguished and very popular professor at the school, so I hope I'm getting my A.
Of course.
Okay. Thank you. And Dr. Ibrahim was running one of these amazing global study trips that we have at the MBA school, where you go for a week abroad at any multitude of continents or countries, and you learn about the business applications and implementations, how to do business in that country. And there was a focus on Islamic finance. I was very lucky that for the first time Smith was doing this trip to Malaysia this past January. So I signed up and I got to meet some great organizations and how they do business there and how they do banking from an Islamic perspective. So learned a lot about the differences between the Western conventional banking, which is where my career is, and then how Muslims do it differently. And so that's also where I met Mr. Monam Salam, who's our first speaker, who gave an overview to my class. Before we move on to Mr. Salam, I wanted to, because we have such a diverse crowd tonight, I wanted to maybe touch on some very high-level basics. Thanks to Dr. Ibrahim, he put this slide together for our class. There were 12 students, 2 of us were Muslims and 10 were not. So it was very refreshing to see a lot of interest from different cultures. So let me just go through that very briefly. If you guys can see the PowerPoint on the side. There's basically 5 pillars of Islam. The first is the declaration of faith itself and in all the beings that God created. So that's just the basic principle that we have. Monotheism shared with Christianity and Judaism. And then the second pillar is praying 5 times a day. That's why we were a few minutes late, because we had to pray one of those 5 prayers earlier at 6 at sunset. It's called Maghrib. And the fasting, if you have friends that fast during the month of Ramadan, for 30 days, we don't eat while the sun is up. And that's very obligatory. And paying zakah. You're going to hear about zakah a little bit tonight. And that's basically, alms that you pay out of your savings and assets that you have. You pay a certain percentage every year. And there's performing Hajj, pilgrimage to Mecca, which is becoming more and more of a logistical nightmare as millions and millions of Muslims from around the world go there. You hear about stampedes, you hear about all kinds of really scary stuff that happens. So we need more supply chain management, logistical students going there and solve those problems. So other than that, we've got Sharia and the sources of Sharia, and this is going to come up. Mr. Salam is going to touch from a high level on how the sources of Islam touch on Islamic finance. And so you've got the Quran, which is our holy book, which is divine, that we believe. Then you have the Sunnah, which are the acts and the sayings of the Prophet Muhammad that brought the religion to us. And then you have consensus of scholars that will make rulings or fatwas on some of these doubts or issues that come up that are more contemporary, and analogy and rational reasoning. And then, I apply my own reasoning sometimes too, and like to go out and party sometimes. Maybe it's not the best thing to do, but we all have our own levels of understanding, and that's part of the beauty of Islam. This is from Malaysia. Dr. Ibrahim included these pictures. This is from an island called Langkawi. So if you guys ever have a chance to go, Malaysia, Muslim country, and you've got the most beautiful beach resorts and entertainment. These were our chairs that we were sitting on as students. So anyways, okay. So we're going to move on now to Monim's side of the presentation. I'm just going to increase the volume and put up the picture here. The laptop around? Okay, yeah, sure. Yeah, Monam, I'm just going to turn the laptop around so you can see the students. There we go. Unless you just want to see me. What's up? All right. There's your auditorium. You want to just say a couple of words just to test the volume again? Uh-oh, here we go. We got to make sure that that's set up again. One more time on it.
Okay, how about this?
Okay. Actually, I apologize. I totally forgot to introduce Monam and his credentials. So let me just start with that one more time. So now he can see what the nice compliments I'm going to say about him. Monam Salam, he's Saturna Capital's Director of Islamic Investing and Deputy Portfolio Manager. Raised in Texas, Mr. Salam received his degrees from the University of Texas, BA in Austin and MBA in Dallas. He joined Saturna Capital as manager of the largest Sharia-compliant equity mutual funds in the world in June 2003. He is active with the Muslim community in North America through ISNA, and current chairman of Peaceful Communications, which is a nonprofit organization which completed a documentary called On a Wing and a Prayer, which was shown on PBS stations nationwide, attracting over 2 million viewers. In 2008, Monam received the 20 Rising Stars Award from Institutional Investor News. This award is given to 20 leaders in the mutual fund industry under 40, who the magazine feels will change the industry in a positive way in the next 10 years. Monam is also the co-author of a new book called A Muslim's Guide to Investing and Personal Finance. Monam has been quoted on all major newspapers and magazines, featured in Business Week, Smart Money, and Kiplinger's, and appeared on such TV stations as CNBC, Fox News, and MarketWatch.com. Monam continues to speak nationally and internationally, both at conferences and universities, on a variety of topics, and we're lucky to have him from Cyber World today from Seattle, Washington. So take it away, Monam.
Thank you very much. First of all, I just wanted to thank Professor.
Oops, sorry. The sound, what happened there? 1 second more, 1 second.
This is a much better way for me to be able to give a presentation,
Okay.
albeit this is the first time I'm doing it, so hopefully it'll be a model for future presentations to come. It truly is an honor to be able to give this presentation. What I'd like to do in my presentation is really go over just on the side of the investing aspect of it. What are Islamic investing guidelines? What's the history? And just the review of the actual industry itself? Those type of things. And then I think I'll turn it over to my other distinguished colleagues to talk a little bit more about the financial aspect of the banking laws, mortgage financing, and those type of things. So with that, I think we can begin with the next slide. I think you guys are moving the slides as I go along, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so the next slide, the idea here we have to keep in mind is that the Quran itself, which is a holy book for Muslims, actually encourages trade and investment. There's a number of ways it actually does that. We can talk about them in more detail a little bit later. But one just idea that I wanted to throw out to you in as far as the trade and investment is concerned is that we talk about Sundays being a holiday for Christians. Well, for Muslims, the idea of a holiday is on Fridays. And yet, interestingly enough, when talking about Fridays in the Quran, what God says is that when it comes time for the prayer, to go and make the prayer, but when you're done with it, go out and seek the bounties that God has created for you. So it's actually encouragement not to take the day off, but really to work during that day, take the time off for the prayer, and then go back to work itself. So that's just one example of that. However, what happens is that when you talk about investing or finance, and you talk about the Islamic angle of it, what you have to keep in mind is that if you talk about Islamic finance, Islamic is the actual adjective to the noun, which is finance, right? So where finance is the general thing. So everything is going to be acceptable. All the investments are acceptable, except for certain ones that are specifically prohibited in the Quran or in the Sunnah, which is the sayings of the Prophet, those type of things. And the traditional Islamic contracts that you have, and there's 4 basic types that are out there, and I think our next colleagues are going to talk about those. They form the foundation of whatever Islamic finance is. And there's throughout history, there's been a lot of reasons why people would want to save money, invest their money, those type of things. One of the biggest reasons when you look at it from an Islamic perspective is the obligation for Muslims once in a lifetime to go out and make the pilgrimage. It's not an easy task. Traditionally it's always been very expensive. Currently, right now, it costs anywhere between $5,000 to $10,000, and so the idea becomes how do you? The only way to be able to save that or to afford it is to be able to go out and save, for that opportunity. It used to be in years past that people, used to take care of all of their family things and then take basically a lifelong journey. It used to take sometimes a year to year and a half before they got back, if they got back. To their home, back to their home country, home city, or home village, and that's why the title of Haji, which means the person that's performed Hajj, was actually considered very, very important because it signified that you not only made the journey, but you actually made it back, which the majority of the people never ended up doing. Children's education is another one, and then the other one is obviously having an adequate means for retirement and those type of things. So let's go to the next slide if we can. I am going to talk a little bit about the industry, the growth rate, and the size of it a little bit later on. And so if we can go to the next slide, I'll basically start my presentation. The idea being is that if you look at what the justification is within Islam for this idea of investing, the companies that a Muslim invests in have to be operating in a halal way or in a permissible way, and there's certain criteria that come about because of that. However, there's no company that would be 100% acceptable operating according to Islamic guidelines in the U.S. or, for that matter, there's a very, very few number in the world itself. And so the question becomes: is there some type of a leeway that one can have to still make those investments? And also, there's when you are saving for long term, there's a bunch of options that you have, but are they viable or not is really how this idea came about of allowing these certain tolerances to be out there. One of the options, for example, is you don't need to save any money. You just kind of rely on God and say whenever the time comes, somehow I'm going to just come up with the money. Pretty not viable, but some people do end up doing that. The second way to do that is to put your money in a bank account. However, bank rates right now are less than 0.5% per year, and probably not going to make you rich overnight. So that's probably not also a good savings method either. And then you have real estate and or businesses that you can do. But a couple of things is that you need a lot of cash, but also at the same time, you have to be able to liquidate it when that certain event happens, whether it be education or Hajj, those type of things. And that's not readily available. Sometimes that's not possible to do. So there's a concept in Islamic jurisprudence called haja, which means a general need. And general need, it basically means that if something is permissible in its totality, so for example, investing in general Islam is permissible, but has some form of impermissibility in it, so for example, the interest dealings of a company, those type of things, because of the general need of the population to need that, it becomes something that's acceptable. But these are based on certain criteria, and if you go to the next slide, I'll explain to you exactly what those criteria are. There's basically four conditions that are there. The first one, just to let you know, there's been Islamic investing has been around since the late 1970s, early 80s, but in 1999 was when it began to be widely used, and there are four main factors that were actually conditions to making something a general need. The first one is that the primary business of the company has to be permissible. It cannot be, as I'll get into later on in my slides, it can't be anything that's impermissible within Islam. The second one is that there has to be the income that's from the impermissible sources has to be very, very small. Okay, and I'll go over the percentages later on. The third part is that the ownership of a company also has to be in illiquid assets, because if you have liquid assets and you trade them for a premium or a discount, that's when you get into trouble when it comes to Islamic rules, because trading in liquid assets for either a premium or a discount is what's considered riba or interest, and that is forbidden in Islam. And the last criteria is that there is a difference between a shareholder and a stakeholder. What that basically means is that I'm a shareholder, for example, of IBM, but that doesn't mean I have control over what IBM does. I can't walk into the CEO's office one day and say, hey, you know what, money you're keeping in the bank account, that's not a good thing. I think you should put it into something else. That's generally not done. So I'm not really a stakeholder. I don't have ways to be able to change that, but I am a shareholder in that. And these four kind of these ideas, these four conditions, was what actually led to the idea of Islamic screening and what that is. So let's go to the next slide, if we can. A couple of general things that are out there. I mean, this is basically a work in progress. There are indices, other scholars that are out there, that the more they look into the issue, the more different experiences that we have, we're beginning to learn more. For example, since the widespread use of these indices, we never had a market crash like we did in 2008. And so there was a lot of learning experience that happened after that as well. So that there are some differences amongst the different scholars that are there, but they're minor differences, and I'll go into those a little bit later on, but there is a general consensus as to what is allowed and what's not allowed. Primarily what happens is that these screens are divided into two main areas. The first one is a primary business screen, and the second one is a financial ratio screen. The primary business screen actually gets into, that anything that a company does, the primary revenues of a company cannot be in something that's impermissible. So a small amount of revenue is okay, but then the question becomes, how much is that going to be allowed? So the impermissibility, if you go to the next slide, will tell you about exactly what is not allowed. And generally speaking, it's whatever a Muslim is not allowed to eat or consume, eat, drink, play with, or whatever it is, then definitely it would be also something that you're not allowed to invest in also. So you have alcohol, you have financial services, gambling, pork products. The next slide, he talks about pornography, tobacco. But there sometimes would be some questionable industries as well, right? For example, nobody would argue that even during the time of our Prophet Muhammad, that they used to manufacture weapons and they used to use them in cases of war. So what do you do in that situation? So generally there are some areas where there is some differences of opinion. Generally, I'll tell you, however, that weapons of mass destruction are not something that anybody would allow for investments, even in any index that I've actually seen. So those are the types of things. So the next slide, we're talking about the second part of it comes now that we've kind of eliminated the company from the primary revenues. The second thing we look at is financial ratios. And basically here what we're trying to do is we're trying to limit a company's exposure to any kind of debt for financing operations, trying to eliminate companies that are de facto cash companies, so majority liquid. And then, the other thing is how much is tolerable when it comes to the impermissibility. And if you look at all the differences that are out there within the space, this is probably where the major difference actually lies. So what are the main areas that people look at financial ratios? The first one is total debt to market capitalization, right? You're looking at basically how much debt a company has and what are they using that money for, to finance operations, those type of things. Accounts receivables to total assets. Basically, two reasons here. If you have a significant number of your assets and accounts receivables, you're basically trading on cash, which is, again, if you can be a cash company, you just can't then trade it for a premium or a discount. And the last one, again, is a impermissible revenues to total revenues. And that would be something that's there also. Now, let's give an example of what I'm talking about, and that's the next slide. So let's supposing that there's an investment committee and they say, well, what about Southwest Airlines? Well, before we even look at whether it's a good company or not, we first have to determine whether or not it's permissible when it comes to Islamic criteria. And so first we look at it and say, well, what kind of business is it in? And so it's in the business of transportation. There's nothing inherently forbidden about that, so that would qualify as a company. Then, do they have any secondary revenues, right? That's the second thing that you have to look at. And that's where the third criteria of haram revenues or impermissible revenues to total revenues comes from. So you look at the balance sheet of Southwest Airlines, you look at their total debt, what their market capitalization is, and in order to smoothen out the returns, you look at a 12-month trailing, or sometimes people look at a 24-month trailing average to be able to come up with that market cap. And here, as long as it's below 33%, for example, that would be acceptable. When you look at accounts receivables, total assets, Southwest Airlines, doesn't actually, you can't basically say, let me fly now and I'll pay you back 90 days from now. So they're basically on a cash and carry basis, so they don't have very many accounts receivables to total assets. And the last one, which is the haram revenues to total revenues, here we're talking about, so the primary business of Southwest Airlines is transportation, but at the same time, they do sell alcohol on their planes. And so how much of that revenue is coming from that? And they might have some cash on their balance sheet that's earning interest. And so how much of that is coming from there? And looking at it on a total revenue side, and then coming up with whether or not that would be something that's acceptable or not either. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So there's a rationale that is here. As I mentioned, this idea before, there is a difference between necessity and need in Islamic understanding. Necessity would basically mean it's something that if you didn't do it, you would die, right? I mean, like if you're in the middle of the desert, there's nothing to eat, you're dying of starvation, and a pig happens to walk by, can you eat the pig? Well, after you answer the question of why is the pig doing there when nothing else is around, eat the pig also, but you can eat it only in a necessity or a life or death situation. The second criteria is what I mentioned to you, which is the general need. And there is a general need, as I mentioned, I argued earlier, that if there's a general need and something that's permissible in its totality, but it's impermissible in a little part of it, you would still be allowed to do that. Then the question becomes, well, what if there's no general need? So if there's no general need, obviously these criteria would not be applying. So the idea being is that no company is going to be 100% clean. So what do? If you want to allow the investments, but no company is 100% clean, what is tolerable and what's not? And so I wanted to mention this one thing here, which is that a lot of people sometimes will argue that a lot of these screens are pulled together from nowhere. They're just kind of arbitrary and those type of things. And that's really actually not the case. There are justifications, albeit from analogies, from the life of our Prophet Muhammad, from other examples from his life stories, what he said, what he did, those type of things, that the scholars have actually drawn these all different types of things. So let's go to the next slide. There are a bunch of different indices that are actually out there. The first index that was launched officially was in 1999. Now, Islamic investing didn't start in 1999. Us, Sterling Capital, we've managed the amount of funds. Amount of funds started in 1984. The first fund that was launched globally was in 1979. And so there have been funds around, but really when the Dow Jones launched in 1999, it became a good benchmark for people to use as a proxy to figure out how they were doing performance-wise. And then subsequently, Financial Times, Stock Exchange, FTSE, MSCI, S&P, all within the last 5 or 6 years have come out with their own indices. And generally speaking, it tell you and it give you an idea of the demand, because the more indices come out, the more people think that there's a profit potential, and that's why they're doing it. That is definitely the case. And then each of these indices have what's called a Sharia advisory board. And what that basically means is that there are scholars that are not only well-versed and expert in Sharia, which is the Islamic law, in financial transactions, but also at the same time, they're well-versed in financial transaction conventionally as well. And they can kind of opine about what is permissible and what is not. And the methodologies of all of these, I'm not going to spend time going over them. They are available on each of their websites. If you go, for example, on Google and say, Islamic FTSE or Islamic MSCI, you'll be able to pull up their website and you can easily download their own methodology. Generally what happens is there's a conventional world index. They have some Islamic screens that you kind of filter out, and you're going to come up with a global or world index or Islamic Sharia global index. And then they break it down by country, by industry. You can do that in many different ways, but that generally starts with a global conventional index and then breaks down from there. In the next slide, I've actually kind of broken down the different methodologies that are actually there. So the Dow Jones is number one, FTSE, S&P, and MSCI. And if you look at the business screens, all of the business screens are actually exactly this, very, very similar. It's just how each of these indices classify an industry. Okay, and that's what well, for example, MSCI looks like it's a lot bigger than it would be for Dow Jones, Islamic, or FTSE, but that's not necessarily the case. There's no disagreement whatsoever about the debt that has to be less than 33%. As more indices came about, they were looking to make their product a little bit different, and so some accounts receivables as a percentage of total assets, there are some differences amongst them. And then there's a cash and marketable securities is the other criteria that's there. Most indices have gotten away from the idea of haram revenues or forbidden revenues to total revenues, but the cash and marketable securities is something that actually kind of is in place of that. And one of the things that you want to keep in mind is that it's really a matter of what is your choice, or what is your own bias in what index you actually use whenever you're actually making your benchmark. And so for example, in Malaysia, FTSE is very, very popular. In Europe, Dow Jones is very popular. So it just really depends on the region versus country versus individual company bias as to what you're actually including and not including. And the last one I wanted to talk about is dividend purification. And that's, I've mentioned it here, where Dow Jones and FTSE actually don't do it, but MSCI and S&P do. And so on the next slide, you'll see exactly what that really means. And there are basically two different types of purification. And the idea comes about basically where company is as I mentioned earlier, engaging in something that's forbidden. And so that portion of the income, and the important part to remember here is it's only on income. It's not on capital gains. The income of that portion which is not acceptable, you have to basically give that away, right? How you derive that, all of those things are a secondary issue, but the general idea is you do have to give that away. Again, it's the idea of it's a percentage based on the percentage of forbidden income. It's not on capital gains, but only on dividends. And there's not a really consensus formula as to where how these are actually calculated. But definitely people do, scholars do agree that it has to be given away to charity. There can be no benefit that you derive from it, and it is considered a purification, so you can't take a tax write-off on the purification that you're doing. And then there's also what's called a moral purification, where you're basically, you're looking at the annual proxy statements of the companies, making sure you're voting in line with your, with your beliefs as well. And finally, on the last slide, just wanted to give you a current landscape for the industry. There is a global provider. There's more and more coming about. The one that has been the longest standing and most accurate is a company called Phallic Advisors. and they've kind of ranked about 350 different funds that are classified as Sharia, and there are about 125 managers that are doing that. Majority of these 350 funds that are out there are actually located in Malaysia, and that's due to their long history. The first fund, as I mentioned, launched in 1979, was actually launched in Malaysia. In the U.S., basically, there's 3 fund companies making up about 5 funds. There's the Allied Asset Advisors, there's Azad Asset Management, and then there's us, Saturna Capital, that manages the Atlantic Growth Fund, Atlantic Income Fund, and the Developing World Fund. Now, in the U.S. at least, we are restricted from only buying onshore funds, so it restricts Muslims and, for that matter, anybody, from only buying these 5 funds. The last thing that I wanted to mention is that there has been some type of a push towards ETFs, or exchange traded funds. There is actually one based on the MSCI International that's traded on the London Stock Exchange, so people could buy that. There was one actually in the U.S. It only lasted for about a year and a half, and last year it closed down. It was called JETS. The JVS was a symbol, but they didn't see enough demand for the actual ETF, and so they ended up shutting it down. Again, the idea here, and I want you to keep in mind, is that what these guidelines do is they put us into a kind of a space within the fund management area, not only which is faith-based, but also socially responsible. But I think that at least for the point of view of Saturna Capital, the mana funds have actually graduated away from faith-based, away from socially responsible, into the conventional space. And not only are we competing with the Vanguards and the Growth Fund of Americas out there in the world, but we're actually doing a lot better than they are. And so significantly over the past 4 or 5 years, we've seen significant inflows within our funds, because the traditional, conventional investors that are out there have noticed that our funds are outperforming, and they've bought us because of our criteria, because of our philosophy, and because of our returns. So with that, I'll close. I want to thank you for the presentation. And if there's any questions, I think we're going to take them afterwards. So I'll just stop here and let somebody else take over. Thank you very much.
Monam, just wanted to thank you very much again. We really owe him a lot for taking the time out of his schedule to be able to come and give a speech about that. So thank you very much. We'll introduce the next speaker now. Hassam Khatub is he's the Vice President of Marketing and Communications for Guidance Residential LLC, which is the leading U.S. provider of Sharia-compliant home financing. He has 12 years of experience in developing effective communication strategies. He's a senior account manager. He was also a senior account manager for the Didion Group, which is a Washington, D.C. based public relations, marketing, and public affairs consulting firm. Their domestic and international clients included multinational corporations, emerging market startups, and nonprofit organizations. He also led several campaigns for Muslim American clients, including the Islamic Society of North America, ISNA, the Muslim Public Affairs Council, and the Islamic Free Market Institute. He was also research analyst and senior group leader with Johnson, Tyler, and Purvis PC, a strategic counsel for Philip Morris, where he led a group of research associates in analyzing external corporate communications and marketing. We won't hold it against Mr. Khatub that he's a graduate of George Mason University, where he earned his BA in International Relations. But ladies and gentlemen, please give Mr. Khatub a warm Terp welcome.
And I won't hold it against all of you for being University of Maryland students or alumni. I want to thank you guys for having us today. Fahad and I don't see her, but Hanifa, who really helped, there she is, helped put this whole event together. I think this is very, very long overdue. Many universities, I think, around the country are starting to sort of begin identifying courses or forums like this to try to elevate the level of education on Islamic finance. And I think Maryland is heading in the right direction as far as that's concerned. I'm also happy to see Dr. Hassan here in the room today. It was a good surprise to see you. We go way back. But I guess the clicker, you've got the clicker. It doesn't matter to me, but I think the purpose of my presentation today is to help shed some light on what is the financing side of Islamic finance. How can you go out there and purchase a home, a car? Traditionally, we all know that we go through the channels of sort of the banks or the mortgage companies that can help facilitate those transactions for us. But there is an issue with that, and I'll try to give as much detail as possible without boring you guys to death. But at first, I'm going to start with the state of the industry, move on to the standardization and oversight of the industry, which is a huge topic globally. Then understanding the fundamentals and principles. This is where you'll really get your hands around what is the difference between, for example, a Bank of America mortgage and a guidance residential mortgage. There are features and benefits that I'll highlight as well as a result of going maybe the Sharia compliant route. A lot of people would ask us, if I didn't really care and I wasn't that devout, why should I finance my house through you guys? Well, there are actually some features and benefits that are kind of unique. And then I'll end with our company and some of the headlines we've made, since we are a local company based out of Northern Virginia in Reston. So let's start with the state of Islamic finance and the fact that it's growing rapidly. I think a lot of you who attended today may have gone and done some research about Islamic finance and probably found out that it's been in the news quite a bit, especially since the economic downturn that we've all sort of had to deal with. The annual growth rate as of 2010 is at 15%. It's actually estimated to reach, the industry today is just under a trillion, but it is estimated to reach 2 trillion by 2015. Those estimates are fairly real. And when you put it in perspective, only about 3 to 5% of Muslims worldwide actually solely use Islamic financial instruments as part of their daily lives. So that gives you a snapshot of the potential for this industry and its growth. This is a little sort of excerpt I wanted to share with everybody. Back in March of 2009, the Vatican, I don't know if you can see that, but the Vatican actually in their monthly newsletter issued a statement about Islamic finance. And this is what it said: the ethical principles on which Islamic finance is based may bring banks closer to their clients and to the true spirit which should mark every financial service. It's kind of interesting, the Vatican coming in and weighing in on Islamic finance and what they could do, especially given the horrific financial mess that we were in a few years ago. So standardization and oversight, this is where the industry itself is beginning to look at itself and say, what do we need to do to grow? I mean, how can we be able to grow at that pace, but still maintain certain standards that will not sort of dilute the Sharia compliance part of these instruments? One of the organizations that I want to highlight is IOFI, Accounting and Auditing Organization of Islamic Financial Institution. It's an organization based out of Bahrain. Now, this organization, it's fairly young, but it has really come a long, long way in terms of identifying what are those standards that need to be sort of identified, not only sort of in Muslim countries, but in non-Muslim countries. Given the challenges perhaps in legislation and regulation, what are those standards? And it is the international standard setter today for Islamic finance. There are 200 members from 45 different countries around the world that actually are working with IOFI to try to identify those standards. It has set over 80 standards so far as of 2011, and it continues to grow. They have industry experts, and they also have Sharia experts. And I'll explain sort of this mix of the two groups is not only something that will happen on a global level when you look at standard setting organizations, but it will likely happen even on a very small level, at a company level, where I think one of them touched on the fact that Sharia boards have to be around for each company to be able to be authenticated. So speaking of Sharia board, an internal guidance provider is really what a Sharia board is. If you look at a PricewaterhouseCoopers and such, who comes into a company and does an audit of the company, very similar. The Sharia boards act very similar to that as an independent body that is assigned to the company that is paid, by the way. It's paid for they're paid for their services. This is where some people have you believe that, oh, you know, you just write a check to a Sharia board scholar or a Sharia Islamic financial transaction law scholar, and they'll approve your product. That's far from the truth. I think there's a lot that's riding on the shoulders of these individuals when they approve a product. Thousands, if not millions, of people might begin to use those products, and for them to lead a population that size astray for a check is not something I think they'll do. But this is why you likely look at a board as a group of scholars, and they act as an auditor. So in our case, I'll share who sits on our board here in a little bit. But in our case, we have a board of 8-9 scholars, and they were with us from day one when we began sort of trying to identify what a solution looks like for the U.S. market as far as home ownership, home financing. And we keep them on. Why? Because on a regular basis, they audit us. They come in and say, hey, pull a couple of customer files. Let's take a look at if the structure that you put in place back in 2002 is still the structure you're using today, and has anything changed? The law of the land could change. Certain regulations could come around. Well, new regulations have come actually in the last 12, 24 months that could alter. They haven't yet, but they could alter the way we do business. So let's get to the fundamentals and principles of Islamic financing. Now, first thing I'll have you know is a lot of times people don't quite get it the first time around, and that's okay. It's not as easy as investing. Investing simply says, here's a list of things you're not supposed to invest in, just remove them. I can't invest in alcohol. I can't invest in gambling. That's pretty simple. It's pretty cut and dry. Financing is really a little bit different. It has to do with how we today, how the Western economic system is set up in terms of how do I take a person who's looking to purchase a commodity and cannot afford that commodity today to flat out buy it, but I can get them there through a facilitation of some transaction that both he and I or she and I will make money off of this as they become the owner of a brand new car or brand new house. Commodity-backed transaction is really at the heart of all of this. You call it equity-backed also, equity-backed transactions. In Islam, basically lending money, which is what we're all used to. I mean, a lot of you probably being in school today, you probably looked at student loans as a way to get yourself through school. Lending money in Islam is looked at as purely charitable act. It is meant for one human being to assist another human being in getting back on their feet, avoiding hardships of some sort. So it is an obligation on every person, not just Muslims. If you see somebody struggling, to actually lend, you have the option of donating charitable funds or lending money. And in that sort of transaction, this lender agreement, you're the lender, they're the borrower. You may stipulate how many years, how many months, whatever it may be, and you get repaid. But you're not allowed to do is make one dime or a penny off of any of the dollars that you've lent out. So if I was to lend somebody $1,000 to get them off their feet, to get them back on their feet, I should say, and they promise that, look, once they find a job, they'll repay me. That's great. I will set a term for whatever, 6 months, and they'll repay me in those 6 months till we get back to the dollar amount that I lent out. If I was to ask for a penny on top of that, that is not permissible. Meaning, it's not permissible to make money off of someone else's hardship. That's basically what it means. So given that understanding of what a loan means in society and what it should mean in society, how else can we help facilitate transactions? They have to be commodity-backed, meaning money, currency, is no longer the medium between us. It's the commodity. And this is something to point out as well. One of our Sharia scholars makes a great example. He said money is a medium of exchange. It's to measure what a commodity is worth. We cannot trade in money. So I can't sit up here and say to you, I'll take $10 out of my pocket and say, I'm willing to sell this to anybody who's ready to start bidding at $11. Is anybody here willing to buy a $10 bill for 11 bucks? Anybody? What if we said $12 for the $10 bill? It's ludicrous, right? But essentially, this is what we're doing when we're saying, I will loan you money so I can make money. What you'll have in society is people who sit on mountains of money, really not contributing much to society, really not taking a whole lot of risk in society, but simply loaning it out and making money back on it. So home ownership, what is that transaction? Home ownership is not a transaction where it calls for charitable assistance. In some cases, there is. There are people that are homeless that require nonprofit groups and others to come in and support them in finding shelter. But home ownership, as we know it today, requires somebody to be what? Employed, right? Have some sort of income. You wouldn't, what's that? Have good credit, absolutely. And perhaps some little bit of savings tucked away, right? For a down payment. When you make that move, you're basically making when it comes to home ownership, probably the largest investment that you'll make in your life. So that is an investment, pure and simple. To get you from point A to point B, to become a home buyer to a homeowner, we can't use the lender agreement that's out there used in traditional finance today. What we have to use is something commodity-backed, which we call the co-ownership agreement. So this is, I stick this in because I was actually very surprised to read this at one point. C.S. Lewis, the author, wrote one time about what loan means. A loan means not just in Islam, but in Christianity and Judaism. And he says, there is one bit of advice given to us by the Jews of the Old Testament and by the great Christian teachers of the Middle Ages, which the modern economic system has completely disobeyed. All these people told us not to lend money at interest. And lending money at interest, what we now call investment, is the basis of our whole system. This is a very powerful statement because it really summarizes exactly what Islamic finance stands for in terms of how to facilitate trade and investment in today's economy. Let's go to the next slide. So I say to you, no loans, right? Don't use loans. And probably the first question back is, what the heck do we use? How do I buy my house if I can't take out a loan from the bank? How do I buy my car so I can get to school if I can't finance it through our local bank? Well, there are three permissible concepts in Islam for financing. Okay, you'll notice they're all commodity-backed. They're not currency-backed. One of them is called murabaha. Murabaha means purchase and resale. Very simple. If I was to, let's say, buy this car, and I could simply go out and buy it, maybe refurbish it, and say to you, it cost me $10,000 to buy, but after refurbishing it and doing some things, it's now about $14,000. I'll resell it to you on installments. So we can do installments to go ahead and get you the car to you over, let's say, whatever the term we decide to agree on. That's permissible. There's an asset or there's a commodity, and now I'm reselling that commodity back to you, perhaps at a higher rate, whatever it may be. But there's no lending or borrowing in this transaction. The second one is called ijara. This is very, very, I think you guys will all understand this. Leasing. That's all it means. It's a lease. So you go out to the dealership and you say, they ask you, are you going to finance the car, buy it cash, or lease it? Leasing is permissible because what is the dealer doing? Simply saying to you, here's the vehicle. I'm allowing you to use the vehicle for 36 months. Okay? You'll need a deposit down and you'll need to pay me monthly payments of $300 a month. Okay? You have to qualify as well. You want to make sure your credit is in order. But that's part of the financing world today. You can't avoid that part. What is credit? Credit is really, I always tell people, credit comes from the word credibility. How do I know you're really credible to do business with you, to finance an apartment building with you, to finance a house with you? I don't know your credibility unless I've talked to people. And back in those days, people had credibility. You know, your street cred, as they call it today. They had it, and everybody out there pretty much could tell you if this person is a good businessman, a trustworthy businessman, or not. And that's how you did business. The last one is called musharaka. Musharaka is really the concept that we use today. This is the concept that after spending a tremendous amount, I would say millions of dollars on R&D, as well as working with the top 8 Islamic financial transaction scholars in the world, when we brought them all together, 18 law firms, these guys, we pretty much came up with this solution, the Musharaka solution. Why? Because it's more, it maintains a lot of the features that you see today in the mortgage world for home financing, by the way. It maintains all the features, all the benefits that are available, and it doesn't take away much at all to become permissible. As a matter of fact, it provides a little more. Musharaka basically means partnership. Okay, partnership in a venture of some sort. There are 2 types of musharakas, and this is where I need to clarify this. For a lot of people who actually grew up speaking Arabic, how many people here grew up speaking Arabic as their native language? Quite a few. Okay. Well, you probably grew up hearing musharaka is something that you go to business with your cousin and you buy a hotel, or you go to business with your cousin, you buy a gas station of some sort. This is the regular musharaka. That's true, but there are actually 2 types of musharaka. There is what's called shirakat al-milk and shirakat al-aqd. Shirakat al-aqd is actually the one that we're all very familiar with, those who grew up speaking Arabic. It's the one that a lot of us are familiar with when we hear about partnerships. I'm going to go into a partnership with my buddy, and we're going to start an internet company. It's likely to be a shirakat al-aqd, which is something for joint venture, where you bring money to the table, and your partner brings money to the table. And let's say he brings 60, you bring 40. Guess what happens at that point? It's pretty simple math. All the expenses are split 60-40, the revenues, the profits 60-40. Pretty simple, right? Well, that concept will not work in the US in terms of financing homes. Why? Because we're not looking to actually maintain ownership of the homes with our consumers. We're not looking to say, look, we'll facilitate home ownership for you, you, and you, and you. And here's what we'll do. There's no term. We're going to be partners with you, co-owners of this house with you for life. That's what a shirakat al-aqd would lead us to. What we need to do is have some sort of term that allows us to transfer ownership to the person looking to buy. So shirakat al-milk, joint ownership for consumption, is the model that we've adopted. This is a very simple model. I'll show an example of how pretty much it works. In the next slide, what you'll see is, let's say the family that wants to buy this house they've identified the house, they've saved up about 20% of the value of the home that's for sale. Now they need 80%. Rather than going to a bank and actually getting a loan for that 80%, they would come to a company like us, and they would basically look at the application process is very similar, by the way. There's no difference in the application process. We're looking at their debt to income ratio. We're looking at all the things that are necessary to make sure that they're not getting over their head in buying this home and making this investment. So all of those things, once qualified, really what will bind us together is this co-ownership agreement. And this co-ownership agreement stipulates that, let's say the term we decided on is 30 years, or maybe it could be 20 or 15 years, that in those years, that this couple or this family will buy us out of that home. We'll buy our shares out. Okay? We have what? 80% shares in the home? They have 20% share at the beginning. With every monthly payment for the next 30 years, they'll buy us out in increments. Now, there's a cost associated with this, right? Because faith-based financing, as it may come as a surprise to everyone here, does not mean free financing. So I hope I didn't scare anybody. There is a cost, absolutely. Now, what is the cost? That's the question, and how is it derived? Is it derived through the lending of this cash, or is it derived from this usage of the commodity? In this particular case, we've given the homeowner, the home buyer, exclusive use of the entire property. And here's what we said. Over the 30 years, you're going to buy us out, but over the 30 years, you're going to have exclusive use of the entire property. Meaning 20% is your ownership today and 80% is ours. We're not going to take the kitchen, the 3 bedrooms upstairs and leave you with the basement. And you can't come upstairs at all. You have exclusive use for the entire property, and we'll charge you for usage of that property. That's how we derive our profit. Does that make sense so far? The cost is the same. If you look at it from a cost perspective, the cost is the same. And I'll use this analogy to help everyone sort of keep up. Let me explain. This was an analogy that was made by actually our chairman. I was interviewed one time by National Public Radio, and the reporter was having a hard time understanding. Well, wait a minute. If it costs the same and everything is the same, then really I don't see a difference in the financing side of Islam. Here's a simple example. Let's look at. We all realize Muslims are not allowed to eat pork, right? So are Jews. They're prohibited from eating pork products. But there are hot dogs out there called Hebrew National. They're produced in a certain way, and they're accessible really by everybody, except they meet a certain criteria. Now, when Hebrew National goes and sells their hot dogs on a Safeway or Giant or whatever, they have to price it. They have to price their hot dogs, and it has to be competitive with who? Who does it have to be competitive with? Not Doritos. It has to be competitive with the pork hot dog sitting on the shelf right next to it. Correct? Here's another analogy. Potato chips. A lot of people, this is the one I use actually on National Public Radio. Potato chips. They're permissible to eat by everybody. I don't know any religion that bans potato chips. But believe it or not, if you go into a store and you look at a bag of potato chips on the shelf and it's 99 cents, you may pick it up and say, I'm willing to pay 99 cents for a potato chip. But then you look at the ingredients, and in those ingredients it says, we take the potatoes, we cut them, we have fresh potatoes from Idaho and so on and so forth, but we fry them in lard. That's how we produce our potato chip. Everybody knows what lard is? So frying that potato chip in lard, all of a sudden, just made it not permissible for Muslims and Jews to eat. So if I was to go into business tomorrow, I could literally start grabbing the same potatoes from Idaho, okay, slicing them up, but frying them in vegetable oil, and then putting them on the shelf right next to the other potato chips. All of a sudden, I have a dilemma. What do I price them at? It's really not that big of a dilemma. It's 99 cents a bag, most likely, right? Unless the vegetable oil costs me a little more than the lard. But making that potato chip a 99 cents bag potato chip does not make it non-halal or non-Sharia. Financing is very similar. It's the process. It's really all about the process. And I'll explain why this process is more permissible than the simple process of saying, here's a lender agreement. I'm going to lend you this money. Go do what you want to do with it. But when time comes, I'm going to come back and get the return on this. I'm not really going to share much of any risk with you. You need to pay me back. It's a loan. I don't care what happened to the commodity. So here's a few things that help differentiate that. First and foremost, late payment fees. I don't know how many people here have mortgages. At this age, I'd be very impressed, actually. Well, very good. Got a few. In a mortgage, you have your monthly payments, and they're usually due on the 1st, and you have to pay by the 15th. If you're late, the conventional mortgage providers charge you a fee. It's a late fee. How do they calculate that late fee? Very simple, 5%. It's 5% of your monthly payment is how they calculate late fees, okay? Now, did it really cost them 5%? Because you paid on the 16th rather than the 15th? Absolutely not. And what they look at, the Bank of Americas and you name them, they look at late fees every year as a channel of revenue. They make money in this. This is a revenue stream that they count on year in and year out. As a matter of fact, the more people are late, the more money they'll make in that revenue stream. For a company that is following Islamic financial transaction laws, we cannot derive revenue from this source right here. Why? Because people forget. People have experiences, people go through hardships, they lose their jobs, they forget, or they just cannot make their monthly payment. It is not an opportunity to jump on those people and actually derive a revenue stream. Therefore, what do we do as a Sharia compliant organization? Our fee is a fixed it's a capped fee that basically looks to recoup the cost of administering a late payment. What happens when somebody is late from a business perspective? What happens is you have to pretty much say, okay, the check didn't come in the mail on the 15th. We have to now actually take our collections department, it's been sitting around chewing gum and doing nothing else, and now have to activate them. And if we didn't hire any, we have to hire them. We have to hire them to do what? To call, reminder calls. We have to actually send out reminder letters in the mail All of this is part of the regulations that we have to go through. And all of that actually creates a cost. It creates an undue cost on the organization. What we are allowed to do simply is recoup that cost. We actually hired the Stratmore Group, a research firm, to help us identify what that cost is before we even launched the product. We went through this exercise that says, okay, if you're a mid-sized mortgage company and you have this many mortgages out there, X percent will be late, this is the norm, and this is how much your company will have to actually spend to recoup that money. We took that number, we actually brought it way down, and we capped our late fees at $50. So So a late payment fee for a company like an Islamic financing company, it has to be a capped fee, okay, that only pays off the administrative fees that are involved with administering the late payment. As I mentioned, ours is fixed at $50. It's capped at $50 or 2%, whatever is less, because some people actually have mortgage payments that are around $600, $700, and $50 is a little excessive that we thought, and so we actually reduced it for some. Next one is non-recourse clause. A lot of people here probably don't realize, but when a bank, and this has been happening a whole lot in the industry today, with all the foreclosures that are occurring, what do you think happens after foreclosure? The bank takes the home, right, after a certain period of time, and they try to go out there and sell it on the market if the consumer is not willing to sell it. It is in the right of the bank at some point or another to actually liquidate that property. It is, because at the end of the day, if someone is unable to get back the income that they lost and unable to pay, and a certain amount of time should be provided to help them get back on their feet, but if they can't, then the option to sell or the option to rent out the property should be looked at very seriously. If not, foreclosure is the inevitable result. So what happens when they sell that home? Have you heard about a lot of these homes not selling for what they were worth to begin with? Well, what ends up happening if there is recourse in the contract is very simple. I went on this, if I was a bank and I actually loaned you $180,000, the house was actually valued at $200,000 when we first got it. Now, we sold it in a foreclosure sale, and we only recouped $150,000 of the home. Well, guess what happens? There's recourse. It's simple. You still owe that $30,000 difference. And the bank will come after you. You'll have to either liquidate whatever you may have to pay the bank off, or the bank will come after your savings and other things. So if you have that vacation property in Florida, they're going after that one as well. So that's what recourse means in a more traditional mortgage contract. Non-recourse is pretty straightforward. The commodity backed. Do you remember when we talked about this as a commodity backed transaction, not a currency backed transaction? The commodity backed transaction means between us and the home buyer is this commodity. And once this commodity is sold, it's liquidated, we have nothing else to bond us together. So we take that loss. That's why we have a non-recourse clause. Third is contract termination risk. There's only two scenarios where we have to dissolve the co-ownership agreement, and it is at no fault to the consumer or us. One is eminent domain. Does anybody know what eminent domain is? It's when the government thinks it's a great idea, local government, whoever, thinks it's a great idea to actually put a highway through your house and forces you to sell. Now, it happens. That's one. Second is a natural disaster that destroys the property altogether. So in both cases, we lose the commodity, right? Now, there's going to be proceeds that come back from either the government or the insurance company, right, in the case of a loss to natural disaster. What happens in that situation? If the proceeds that come back are much less than the original contract amount that we both agreed on at the onset, we actually share in the loss, equal to the portion of ownership at that time, at the loss. Fourth is a prepayment penalty. Yes, it exists out there. If you take a loan with a mortgage company, be sure, if you're not going to go with a Sharia-compliant mortgage provider, be sure there is no prepayment penalty in that mortgage product. They have them. They exist. And I've seen them go as high as $15,000 for a person who paid in the first year, decided to pay off their entire mortgage in the first year. They were penalized. Well, I think it would be silly for us to charge that kind of money, seeing that we can't make profit off of anything but what we identified in the onset, and that is utilization. So our source of revenue comes from utilization, the consumer utilizing our portion of the property till the end of the term. And the very last thing I'll add is tax deductibility is available through our product. One of the things that people say is, if I go and utilize a mortgage company that sells a faith-based product because it meets my faith-based requirements, is it going to harm me from all the other? Is it going to take away the advantages that the government provides? There are a lot of first-time home buyer credits, all those things that are available. There's the tax write-off as well. One of the things that we wanted to make sure, and I think every mortgage company that provides Sharia-compliant home financing in the U.S. does, is provide those same benefits that are still available. Okay, we can move on to the next slide. So here are some of the features. I won't bore you with the features, but going back on the same point is providing the same conveniences that are out there that you would find at your Bank of America and all those things. We wanted to make sure we are issuing a product in this country that still maintains those benefits. So they're all still there. And I mentioned earlier the Sharia scholars. These are the 7 scholars that we have on our Sharia supervisory board. You know, if there's a test to the authenticity of a product, first and foremost, you would look at the Sharia board that approved their structure. And I have to tell you, there are companies out there that will provide a product without this. And this is what it really hurts I think the industry as a whole, is when we see these kinds of products come out and the scholar of the company or the scholar of the product happens to be the CEO and president or the CFO or others. That is a huge conflict of interest. No one who has a stake in the success or failure of the company should ever be a member of the board that supervises that product's authenticity in terms of Sharia law. So a couple of facts about our company. We've been in business for about 9 years. We opened up our company in April of 2002, and we're today operational. We were operational back then in 3 states. It was not easy, let's just say, to get a product out there in the way we wanted to get it out there. We actually struck an agreement in 2001 with Freddie Mac. How many of you know who Freddie Mac is? Here's a question I really want to ask. How many of you people here think Freddie Mac lends money? Okay, so a few of you. Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, okay, these are the GSEs, do not lend money. They're not in the business of lending money. This is why we were able to approach an organization like Freddie Mac to work with us in being our main investor for all these transactions. Specifically because they are not a lender. They are not allowed to lend money as part of their charter, which was issued by Congress. They are there as an investor. What they do is they buy the interest share of that mortgage. If you look at a mortgage, let's say, here's mortgages that I produce every year. They buy basically the paper. They buy the interest share, which means, to put it in very simple terms, if I was basically an investor and I came out and said, hey, I'll invest in your restaurant, and I'll go ahead and spend 90% of the cost that you need to build it, to do everything, to launch it. Now I'm 90% what? Owner of that restaurant, right? But tomorrow I can turn around and say, hey, Fahad, I want to sell you my share in the restaurant. And Fahad would say, well, great, I buy shares in restaurants. So he would come in, literally in my shoes, right? Not literally, but you would come into my shoes and pretty much say, here's the money, you bought me out, right? This is what the model looks like today. Because there isn't an unlimited amount of money out there to be able to facilitate all these transactions. And as of 2011, we've provided just over $2 billion in financing in those 9 years. That's not a lot. $2 billion does, though, represent the majority portion of what's been financed out there in the US today. $2.5 billion is what's been provided through Islamic home financing here in the United States. So we were able to do that basically through the help of a Freddie Mac. They are our main investor in this arrangement. One of the things I'll note is our delinquencies. People have asked us why and how is this possible, but our delinquency is less than half of the industry average today. We haven't had as many delinquencies as the majority of mortgage companies out there in the country today. I have a feeling it has to do with a number of things, and one of those things is the capped late payment fee. So when somebody's late on month 1, there's a late payment fee, but it's capped. Month 2, there's a late payment fee, but it's capped. Versus a 5% late payment fee, and then you have the second month, and you have 5% on those 2 months, and then the third month, and it compounds and it compounds. So you put a person in a bad situation, you put them in a worse situation. That, I feel, is a factor. I think another factor is is Muslim Americans in general, what we've noticed, are very they're conservatively fiscal in many ways. They get approved for financing of maybe around $400,000 per home, but they'll go out and buy a $200,000 home. It's been an interesting sort of experience, I guess, the last 7 years that I've been with the company, but we're noticing a lot of these trends that are happening. So I point this out because there was this belief, I think in 2009. You know, we were interviewed several times back in 2002, 2003 about this concept and what it could do for the financial world. It was a novelty back then. People were wondering, how does this work? Kind of like yourselves right now. And they wrote articles about it. But in 2009, a lot of them came back and said, now that you've been around this long, and now that we just sort of are seeing the results of this economic downturn, how are you guys doing? And the question was simply put, are you guys still in business? There's a website out there called implodometer.com. It's real, and it literally has a counter that counts the number of mortgage companies that have failed in the last 4 years. And that number just keeps going and going every time a mortgage company fails. So they were curious, have we failed? And the answer to the media that I'll give to you guys tonight is no. Actually, 2009 was our company's best year in production. 2010 was our second best year in production. And I think a lot of that has to do with the way we conduct ourselves in terms of finance. Many of these organizations tagged our company as being sort of a consumer-friendly form of finance. And others have said ethical finance comes to mind. In 2009, if we go to the next slide, we're actually, our little company out of Reston, Virginia was actually recognized globally. There's a trade magazine. If any of you decide you want to learn more or subscribe to a trade, there's one that's a very good one. It's called Islamic Business and Finance Magazine. It's out of Dubai. And this magazine actually just keeps track of all the companies that are out there that are operating globally and how they're doing and such. They have award ceremonies every year. We were nominated as 2009 Best Islamic Home Finance Provider, which shocked us, to be frank, because we thought we were this little teeny tiny company here in the US where there weren't that many Islamic finance companies and not a lot of attention was given. So we're proud of that, and I wanted to share that with everyone. I want to thank you all for coming, and I'll pass the baton on to the next speaker.
Thank you very much. If this was a baseball game, this is a 7th inning stretch. So if anyone wants to stand up and just sort of get ready for the next speaker, we have Dr. Afifi coming up. One thing that was touched on that I maybe want to share from my trip to Malaysia was about the Sharia board. And there was a joke that you just got to pay your Sharia board some money and then you'll get something approved. In Malaysia, the way it works is there's a hierarchy. So you have this Sharia board that's at the national level that overlooks all the Sharia boards of the individual companies. So you can't just have something passed and approved and go ahead and sell it in your market. It has to go through a certain hierarchy. And it is assumed that at the central bank level, at the top level, that they're not going to let that kind of stuff go through. So that's something good. But Dr. Afifi, if you'd like to come, and I'll share a few words to introduce you. Please stand and be recognized. All right. Dr. Hussein Afifi is a well-known and respected lecturer who studied Islamic studies at the Institute of Arabic and Islamic Studies in Fairfax, Virginia. He also studied family fiqh, Islamic transactions, and Islamic law from well-known Islamic scholars such as Dr. Salah Asawi and Dr. Yusuf Ashibali. Dr. Afifi has more than 12 years of experience in counseling and helped many families in the Montgomery County Muslim community to resolve marriage and family conflicts by teaching better communication techniques. All these people leaving, by the way, they're not going to get snacks. We're going to have them all to ourselves. So don't. He has given many seminars in fiqh as-siyam, fiqh az-zakat, and Islamic transactions in the Washington metropolitan area. Last but not least, he has a PhD in chemistry from Pennsylvania State University. Everyone, please give him a Turk welcome.
Thank you, and appreciate you inviting me here. As you can see, I moved through a lot of things during my life, and today actually I'm going to cover a part which is a little bit different than the first two speakers. I'm going to talk about from the Islamic faith perspective about how Islam look at the community and how the law of Islam bring a strong, very well tied together community. And one of the concepts of, if you remember, the first speaker talked about the five pillars of Islam. This is one of them. And the term zakah, go ahead to the next one. The term zakah is actually a term, a Sharia term means it came from the Holy Quran and from the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. And the word zakah in Arabic, which translates to English purification, or to increase, or to multiply. And because today I'm going to cover a lot of things about this, I'm going to talk about the definition of zakah, because there are some people here are not from the Islamic faith, so they might doesn't know what zakah is. And I'm going to talk about the judgment of the zakah, and this is concerned the Muslim, how they look at it. And then the wisdom that we can get out of why Islam provided this zakah. And then I'm going to talk about the conditions of the zakah, and the last, which I might either cover it or not, depends about you guys if you want to know it, how to do it, is how we calculate the zakah. So the term zakah definition is actually means purification or increase, and it's actually a term related to the wealth. And technically, this is the word in Arabic. So if you go and search in Google, you find the word zakah, and you find the definition, you'll find the translation of it is that what we give here. And also one of it is called blessing. Because in the Muslim faith, we not only look at the issues of the transaction, but it has to be according to the law of God. So in Sharia, which is the Muslim the law the Muslim follow, it's as it's defined in front of you. It's a certain amount of money taken from the wealth and given to certain people that deserve it. So it's a certain amount of money, take it from the wealth every individual or company has, and give it to the people who deserve it, and the people who deserve it has been identified by the Islam. Next, please. Okay, all the Muslim knows that zakah is a pillar. And when we say that, when you talk to any Muslim, say, okay, a pillar, he will ask you, what's the proof? What's the proof that this zakah is one of the pillars of the faith? And there are three ways for us to know that zakah is a pillar. Number one is from our holy book, the Quran, which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has stated. No, I think you passed. Let's go back. Go down. So every Muslim knows that the zakah is a must on him, and it can be done only if it reaches a certain amount of wealth you have, or you own, or you save, in other words. And we have to have a proof for that. If you want to convince any Muslim, if you ask some of the sisters here are wearing the hijab. You ask her why you wear this scarf, she's tell you, because God commanded me to do that. And in my book, and she'll point to you the verse in the book says, cover up your head or cover up your hair. So for us here, the zakah is from the Quran, which is the main source of the Islamic law. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, God says that establish the prayer and give charity or give zakah. And bow down with those who bow down. In another verse, another place in Surah Tawbah, God says, in the chapter of Tawbah, God says, take from their money a small amount to purify them. And purifying them means purifying the person himself, because all of us as human beings, we commit sins, we make some shortcoming. So God wants us to be pure. At that point, giving charity or giving zakah, it's going to purify us, and not only us as individuals and our souls, it also purify our wealth. And this is the first source. The second source is what we call it, the saying of the Prophet, what we call it, hadith. And there are many hadith of the Prophet, peace be upon him. He's encouraging us to, or telling us that zakah is a must that we have to give. One example of this, which is in front of you, when the Prophet, peace be upon him, sent the ruler or the one who's going to teach the people about Islam in Yemen, before Yemen became a part of the Islamic State, he told the messenger, which his name is Mu'adh, when you go there, first teach him the oneness of God. And after that, teach them how to establish the prayer. And then let them know there is part of their wealth should be taken from the rich to be given to the poor. And many other saying of the Prophet and practice of the Prophet to indicate that zakah is part of our religion. And the last one is what we call it ijma' or consensus. And that's a very important concept here. We always say, if you have a proof from the Quran and we have a proof from the Sunnah or the saying of the Prophet, why we need the third one? Why we need the ijma'? Why we need the consensus of the scholars of the Ummah? As a matter of fact, there are some concepts people sometimes misunderstand. They can read a verse for one reason or another, and they will not get the essence, or they will not get the right understanding of it. When the scholars of the Ummah, all of them of the nation, all the Muslim scholars, put consensus and say this is part of it, an indication that anyone who comes after that says I cannot understand it this way, most probably he's going to be wrong. So that's very, very important part. Even we have the proof from the Quran and from the Sunnah, but we need the consensus and the understanding of all the scholars of the nation or of the religion of the Muslim. Okay, how would we know the zakah? There are the first things that you need to know for any person to pay zakah is he has to have or she has to have full possession or ownership. And the second one is to fulfill the nisab. And the nisab is a word in Arabic, means the minimum amount of saving that you have. And from that point, you have to know that you have obligation to pay that part of your wealth for the poor and the needy and so on. And the third one is fulfilling the basic needs, and I'm going to explain that in details. And the fourth one, the lapse of of 1 full year. So there are 4 things we need to look for them to know if you are a Muslim. You need to look for these 4 to know if there is obligation for you to pay zakah or not. So now the first one, the full ownership or possession. If you don't have, for example, any money you have, if I put it in the bank, I have full possession of it. I can withdraw the money. I can give it to somebody without anybody can ask me what you are doing. This is my wealth. I can do whatever I want to do with it. Sometimes you have the money, but you don't have full ownership of it. For example, some of us have invested some money in the 401k. when you go on, you guys, some of you are working, or some of you are paying some money for investment, but you don't have a control of this money. When my company puts some shares and I put some shares of saving, I cannot say, give me that money now. So I don't have a complete position of all my 401k money, so I can have only a certain amount of it. I have full position. So number one, really what I have full ownership of it. Number two, the nisab. So what is the nisab? This is the minimum amount of money that any person or any company or any individual should have as saving. Then he will have to pay zakah or pay money, part of it, to the needy and the poor. And the zakah is the amount of nisab. I'm going to use the word nisab so you understand what nisab means now. The amount of nisab is known by a saying of the Prophet, peace be upon him, that if anybody has a saving, and this is the word, saving 20 dinar of gold and stays for 1 year with him, he has to pay 1/2 of a dinar to be paid for the poor and the needy. I have to remind you, at the time of the Prophet and until recently, people not used to use the paper money for transaction, which most of the problems we have now, because the paper money. We can print as we like, and then we can stop printing, and then we can print again. So this is the issue that most of us go through it every 10 years or 15 years. We have to go and recycle that again because we are not actually having a commodity or wealth that balance and the amount of the spending that we spend. So you can use either the gold, which the dinar was made from gold, or another currency was made from silver, which is called dirham, is also a currency. And let's translate that to the terminology that we know these days, because we don't deal with dinar or dirham, and I don't think any one of us have seen that. If we find one of these now, I'll be so rich. But anyway, go to next slide.
Those are dinars.
This is dinars, but fabricated one, yeah. So dinar is equivalent to 85 grams of gold. So anybody has saving in the bank equivalent to 85 grams of gold, at that point when he gets saving to that amount, he should mark this day on his calendar, and I'm going to tell you later why. Or it's equivalent, for the dirham, it's equivalent to 585 grams of silver. Anybody knows how much the price of the gold today? Actually, the ounce of the gold today, around $1,400. In that figure, little bit less or more. So the nisab, if you can see now, we use the nisab for gold or silver, but the zakah is also applicable to all the commodity that we have. So if somebody is dealing with, he has a farm, he has sheep or goats or camels or cows, he doesn't have gold. He doesn't know how much this worth. So for each one of them, there is a minimum defined by the Sharia, defined by the law, Islamic law. For example, I put just one example here. Anyone of you have a farm of cattle or something? I doubt. But so example of that, if anyone is raising sheep, if he has, once he reach 40 sheep, now his nisab start means that's now the nisab reach, so he has to obligation to pay zakah or part of his wealth for the poor and the needy. Okay, now go to the next slide, please. There is a concept here, we put it in the middle because it's very important. It's called khulata in Arabic, which means partnership or sharing together, have money saved together or company together. And khulata, like if you have a company or you have a business, you and your brother start to have a farm and raising sheep. Now the number of sheep you have and your brother in the farm, 42 sheep. So do we have to pay zakah on it or not? If we divided the sheep because I have half ownership and he has half ownership, we don't have to pay zakah. Because he's 21, I'm 21. But we were in partnership from the beginning. So if you have a partnership from the beginning, you cannot split it at the time of paying your charity. So it has to be as a company or partnership. It has to be partnership from the beginning to the end. And that's why I give you example at the bottom to show that. Go ahead, please. Now, you have somebody, two people sharing, you and brother, 26 dinar. I'm using the dinar so we can get lucky. We might find one when we go out. So you have 26 dinars. We know that 20 dinars is the minimum. So you have 26 dinar saved. And now, should we split the money at the time? By the time the year comes, split the money so both of us doesn't have to pay the part for the poor and the needy? Or should we keep the money together and consider, because we are two, then each one of us is having only 13 dinar, we don't have to pay zakah, or both of us, because we share it, now both of us own the nisab or more, then we pay zakah on it. And for sure, the correct answer is C. The khulata principle here, if you have a company, you cannot split it to avoid paying the part of the zakah. So this is kind of a trick that God told us that you cannot do that. But if we are individuals from the beginning, we cannot also combine because we need to pay the zakah. So whatever the status you have before is going to be valid from before the zakat, before the year or the nisab reach, until also the end when you pay the nisab. Okay, fulfilling the basic needs. Any one of us has basic needs. And the example for basic needs is your home, your car, for a business, the tools you are using, a payment that you have to pay, either a rent or any payment you have to pay. All these basic needs, there is no zakah on it. If somebody owns a house, which is $10 million house, we cannot tell him, come, you have now $10 million pay zakah on the house. So all the basic needs are exempt from the zakah. Yeah, I think I covered all of them. Go ahead. Yeah, this is the concept of if it's a saving, it has to stay for 1 year. Why it stays for 1 year? This is, by Sharia, it is the law. But if you look at the wisdom of 1 year, if a company doing, by the way, the zakah is paid by individuals and companies. Corporation, everybody has to pay that share of zakah. So if a company is running a business, you need them to keep running a business so they can make more profit, so that the poor and the needy will benefit more. So, and that's why it's very important to recognize the day that you reach the nisab. And you mark it on your calendar, that's the day. Let's assume the nisab is $2,000. I start work and I save $2,000. I want to buy a house or I want to buy a car, so I save $2,000. From the day my account reached $2,000, I should go to the calendar, the lunar calendar, and mark this day. I said, this is the day I need to remember next year. If you keep saving, then this day is valid. Let's assume that the $2,000, but you have to spend some money, so the $2,000 went down to $1,500. So scratch that day, because now it's not a valid day for 1 year, and then you go back, when you reach the $2,000 or more, you mark that day. Okay, now you said you have to pay zakah. Who's going to receive the zakah? Also receiving the zakah is obligatory and the categories of zakah has been defined in the Quran. God told us the people who receive the zakah are 8 categories: the poor, the needy, and the people who are working in the agency of collecting the zakah, and the people who are, their hearts are not completely attached to the faith. This is number 4. Number 5, to free the captives. Number 6 is to help anyone who has a debt. And number 7, for the cause of God, of Allah. And how many of them now? The wayfarer. So these are 8 categories that the zakah should be given to them. So you cannot just give the zakah, you look around you and find, okay, you know what, I'm a business major, I finished my business degree, now I got big account, big money, but my dad, he's still the poor guy, he works in one of these small companies, he's only making $50,000, I've got $200,000, so I'll give my zakat to my dad. You know what, this is extra money, I give it to my dad. The Sharia says no. Your dad has to fit in this category, but actually your dad, even if he fits, even if but the standard of living is considered poor, you cannot give it to your dad. Because your dad or your child is your responsibility. So the poor and the needy and all these categories have to be out of the responsibility of the individual. And in Islam, whoever you and up in the same family are not eligible, and you and down are not eligible. You and up means you and your father and grandfather, from your mother or your father, you cannot give them charity. You and down means your son and grandson, you cannot give them charity. But if you give them money and help them, that's fine, but that's not considered the charity or not considered the zakah. Zakah only to build the community and build the society, not to benefit individuals and family members. The wisdom of zakah is, number 1, the purification of the soul, because as I told you before, each one of us commits sins. It doesn't matter, you can be the best man on earth and the best woman on earth. We do some mistakes here and there. And because of this, we need to get closer to the Lord and purification the soul by giving a charity. Number 2, to fulfill the requirements for the poor and the needy, for the poor people. And there's a difference between poor and needy. God says the poor and the needy. The poor person is the one, he does not have enough to fulfill what he needs, or the minimum needs for him to live for a whole year. The needy is somebody he has, but at the end of the year he might have a small short. The poor, from the beginning, he cannot survive. Every month he cannot survive. Every time he get the payment is not enough for him to cover the expenses. But the needy, he might have to cover, but sometimes he will need more because he cannot cover enough. So to fulfill the requirement of the poor, and then to help the people who sometimes their faith is weak, they get challenged. They have a lot of things, they get challenged when the society and give them some help, and then it will help them to strengthen their faith. Helping anybody who's in debt, you know that most of us in this life now, we live in debt. And sometimes terminology, actually, we use it wrong. We say asset while it's liability. You guys in business, right? Sometimes we call it asset. And I was reading an article, I'm not a business major, but I can tell you, I was reading an article, they said the home ownership is asset for the bank and liability for you. I don't know if that's true or not. I'm going to leave that for the business people to agree on this or disagree. But everybody is in debt, usually in a hardship that needs some help. And if the community, the money that collected from charity or from zakah, help them to overcome that debt, will be beneficial for the society. Next. Yeah, to buy equipment for the fighters and the defenders of the state or the Sharia, and the charity or the zakah can be used for that. The traveler, when nowadays we might not have this, but it could happen too. When you travel from one place to another, if you guys went for a vacation and you went to Mexico, nobody can go there now. If you go there to Mexico, it's been the summer, the 2 weeks vacation, spring vacation, and you lost your money. Now, you might be very rich in the state, but now you're stuck there that you need some help. You can call your parents to send you some wiring, but at a certain time in certain places you will not have this. So in that sense, the charity of the zakah can be used to help the needy, to fulfill the traveler that he was abandoned from his wealth or on the road, to get back enough for him to go back to his country or go back to his city, and at that point he doesn't have even to return that money. I think the last one here is purification of the wealth. Remember in the presentation they said there is a kind amount of wealth that need to be purified. And purification of the wealth, I'm talking about even 100% Sharia compliance wealth, needs also purification to get the blessing from God. Anybody want to know how to calculate zakah? Okay. Zakah is 2.5% of what? Of the saving, right? Not your income. How much we pay for taxes? Of what? Income. You see that? If you are in the 25% of your income, no, zakah means only 2.5% of your saving. Of your saving. And zakah is completely different than taxes. In other words, if there is a Muslim state and you live in a Muslim state, it's obligatory on you to pay the 2.5% period. And if the state wants to make more taxes, they can. But for Muslims sometimes say, okay, I pay 2.5% of my zakah. Can I consider this my taxes for Uncle Sam? We say no. Yeah, this is because Uncle Sam is not poor, right? He might be needy, but he is not poor. So Uncle Sam cannot fit the 8 categories that we have there. So your zakah cannot be your taxes. And for sure you need to, as any simple math, that you need to know how much you have. But not only you have a saving, what about have a business? How the business will pay their zakah? I'm not following because I can see Hanifa pushing him, say, okay, overtime, the time. I didn't take the overtime, but I'm going to make it a little bit shorter. If anybody has a business, he has zakah on the business too. He will have the inventory of the business, and after 1 year, he evaluates the inventory money-wise, calculated to the market price of what he has, and 2.5% goes to the needy. So here we pay zakah on income. Corporations have ways to not to pay the zakah or pay the taxes on income. But for us, in Muslim law, companies, individuals, everybody has a saving or has more money than the nisab. After 1 year, he has to pay the 2.5%. And there are more details about this calculation, but the simple way is 2.5% for whatever you have as a business, and you exclude the machinery that you have. Exclude the building of your factory. These are not part of your investment. It's only the commodity you have, you calculated 2.5%, and it has to be given to the 8 categories. I don't think any one of you, if any Muslim who wants to know more about that, just talk to me after that because the time limit. And thank you for listening. And if you have any questions, I'll answer it later. Thank you.
All right, we're going to change the format a bit. Instead of having a panel discussion, if there's any questions for Monam Salam, please give them to myself or Hanifa, and we will make sure your questions are answered by email. We'll take your email address. If you have any questions for the two speakers, we'll just be outside and we'll be socializing, so feel free to ask them on a one-on basis. But let's go and have a break now. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending. And a round of applause for Hanifa.